Hi, everyone. I'm Stan Mallow, the paranormal yacker. My guest today is Lon Milo DuQuette, one of the world's leading authorities on modern occultism. I'll be talking with him about his book, The Magick of Aleister Crowley, a handbook of the Rituals of Thelema. Lon Milo DuQuette, welcome to Paranormal Yacker.
Thank you, Stan.
You, Lon, are the U.S. Deputy Grand Master of the OTO. For those who may not be familiar with the OTO, can you tell me what it is and what are your duties as Deputy Grand Master?
The OTO is about 100-year-old, maybe a little older than 100-year-old, quasi-Masonic. Actually, it started as an academy of Masonry in the 1880s. It always was it specialized in the esoteric aspects of Hermeticism and other Rosicrucian-y kind of studies that were popular in 18th and 19th century Europe. And a lot of Freemasons were also interested in that type of stuff. And it started out as a German Masonic academy. Then in the early 1900s, it attracted the attention, or he attracted their attention to himself, of Aleister Crowley. And it's sort of a long story, but Aleister Crowley eventually took over leadership of the OTO around between 1915 and 1918, when mainstream European or continental Masonry looked down on having women as members of the craft. The OTO officially broke ties with mainstream Masonry and became their own organization, Ordo Templi Orientis, or Order of the Eastern Templars. It was always interested in the esoteric aspects of Hermeticism and magic and stuff. But when Crowley took it over, he really redid the order and the initiatory degree system of the order to be overtly magical. The OTO has been responsible for the publication of Crowley's works, especially since he died. The OTO works a degree system of dramatic rituals in precisely the same manner as that of Freemasonry, and it's arguably the world's largest overtly occult organization. And you don't have to have very many people to be the world's largest overtly occult organization. I would say there's between 3,000 and 3,500 initiate members worldwide. And my duties as Deputy National Grand Master of the U.S. are more or less to be a good face forward for the organization and to do the best I can to be a worthy representation of the virtues of OTO membership. So you're looking at the, hopefully I can live up to that. In other words, my job is to stay out of trouble.
When, Lon, did you first develop an interest in the occult, and what aspect of it first got your attention?
I'm an old hippie, so I became sort of spiritually aware in the mid-1960s and was sort of caught up in the mystical and psychedelic revolution of the mid-1960s, and almost immediately introduced myself to Eastern mysticism through that. After a couple of absolutely breathtaking psychedelic experiences, I knew that there was much more going on in the human soul, the human psyche, than I ever dreamed possible. Before that, I was more or less very materialistically oriented. All it took was several very, very dramatic and wonderful psychedelic experiences in an environment very conducive to mystical self-exploration. It wasn't at parties or things like that. And I knew that from then on that, knowing more about myself was going to be the only thing in life that was worth pursuing, and that everything that everybody seemed to be talking about with religious experiences and religion and seeking God and all of that was to be found within the mysteries of myself. And that took me almost immediately into exploring all forms of Eastern mysticism. I loved Zen. I loved Buddhism. I love Tibetan Buddhism and such. And I set out to be a first-rate yogi. Along with the yogic studies came an introduction to Western occultism. A lot of yogic material that was available in the mid-60s was really material that was written in the late 1800s. Swami Vivekananda, who sort of brought the yogic Vedanta to the United States. A little later on, Paramahansa Yogananda. And that was actually called in those days Eastern occultism. And so I was very comfortable with the term occultism and such. And I wanted to be a good yogi, but it was really hard. And I'm a really lazy person. You know, I'm sort of hardwired differently than the Eastern psyche. Eastern mysticism goes at this quest for self-realization by kind of going inward and stripping away all the things that you're not until you've stripped everything away except what you are. And they call it emptiness. It's not emptiness, it's wall-to-wallness. But it seems like I'm sort of hardwired differently. I get the fact that everything is inside you, but I like to deal with everything outside of myself as metaphors for the inner workings. And I started looking around for the Western equivalent of Eastern mysticism. I was looking for Western Eastern mysticism. And that sort of brought me into the world of Rosicrucianism and the Kabbalah. That sort of introduced me to the idea of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which is another one of those 1888 kind of Western English occult fraternal magical organization. And eventually that inevitably led me to the works of Aleister Crowley.
Aleister Crowley was and is a polarizing figure. There are those who revere him and those who feel he was the devil incarnate. What, Lon, was there about Aleister Crowley's life and works that stirs up such deep emotions in people when his name is even mentioned?
I was freaked. I got the Thoth tarot cards early in the 1970s. I'd only heard Crowley's name in passing before that, and I didn't hear anything bad or anything about it. I just heard his name. I got the Thoth tarot cards at the Pickwick bookstore, and I got them home. I looked at the cards, and they're absolutely beautiful. Frida Harris did the sort of very wild artwork for them, but they were so beautiful. And you know how great art will disturb people. Great art is disturbing. I was sort of used to the old classic images of the tarot, and these were really wild. And so they kind of disturbed me because they were so beautiful and so disturbing at the same time that somewhere in the back of my superstitious Methodist mind, I thought, you know, these cards are so beautiful. I think the devil made them. Sort of like, you know, the great violinist Paganini. He played the violin so wonderfully well and so brilliantly that all the other violinists said, no human can play violin that good. It's got to be the devil. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I said, these cards are sort of disturbing. And so I had an old, almost a pamphlet size book that was an occult dictionary that I bought at the supermarket. I bought it at Ralph's at the checkout. And I looked up Aleister Crowley because it said it was created by Aleister Crowley. I looked it up in the occult dictionary and it said, Aleister Crowley, famous Scottish Satanist. At his funeral, a black mass was performed. But when I read that, and you got to remember, I'm still a superstitious young Methodist. I said, oh, I don't want to have anything to do with Satanism. Oh, gee, I was right. The devil made these cards. Oh, get them away from me. And at the time, I didn't know that what my imagination had created, or what was created in my imagination when I heard the word Satanist, actually didn't exist in real life any place on the planet. I didn't know that. But still, I got rid of those cards. My brother had the Book of Thoth, the book that Aleister Crowley wrote to go with those cards. And somehow or other, he picked it up in his travels. And so I gave the cards to him because I figured they'd go together. And he wasn't going to look at the cards and he wasn't going to read that book. Later on, a friend came over to the house and we hadn't seen in a year or so. And we were catching up on what we've been up to. And I was very excited to tell him that I was studying the tarot and Rosicrucianism and things like that. And I said, oh, by the way, I had these devil cards from a guy named Aleister Crowley. I found out that he was a Satanist, and I got rid of the cards. I gave them to my brother Mark. I didn't want to have anything to do with that. And my friend looked at me and said, get those cards back and get that book. That was the stupidest thing you ever did. Get those, everything you think that you want to learn in your studies. This Aleister Crowley character knew more than anybody else on the planet. And I said, the dictionary says that he was a Satanist. Was he a Satanist? Bob, my friend, goes, no, he wasn't a Satanist. Don't worry, that's superstitious. Then he said, yes, he was. But no, he wasn't. Look, if he was a Satanist, he was a good kind of Satanist, and you're really going to like this guy. So I trusted my friend's spiritual integrity more than his intelligence. So I got the cards back, and I got that book back, and I read the Book of Thoth, and I confess that 99.99% of that book went completely over my head. But that 1 percentage point of a percentage point that I did understand convinced me that this guy was not only brilliant, he was funny, he was almost tongue-in-cheek, evil sounding, and at the same time delivering a 1-2 punch of full-blown spiritual truth. This guy was the best occult author, expert that I had ever read. He was quantum leaps ahead of any other commentator on this stuff. And from then on, I tried to find absolutely everything I could about the guy. And yes, he was a wild and crazy and eccentric Englishman, but you have to remember that you didn't have to be very weird in Victorian England to develop a horrible reputation. And if you had a sense of humor like Crowley, if someone accused you of eating babies or something completely absurd and crazy like that, if you had a sense of humor like Crowley, you wouldn't say, no, I don't eat babies. If you were Crowley, you go, well, yes, I had 120 of them last year alone. He enjoyed freaking out the freak-outable because he mistakenly thought that anybody with a brain in their head would understand where he was coming from and see how valuable his contributions were, and that anybody with even a modicum of humor would understand what he was trying to say. And in many areas of esoteric literature, Eastern and Western, from time immemorial, occultism talks about personal psychological issues, personal sexual issues. The entire Eastern tantric traditions are not afraid to tackle sexual issues and things like that. But in Victorian England, you could get put in jail for discussing medical matters. Medical textbooks had to censor themselves to keep from getting arrested. So Crowley had to talk about very frank issues of human sexuality and magic that dealt with spiritual concepts that were blatantly non-Christian, and he had to do it in such a way as to keep his material in print, and at the same time educating those who had ears to hear. And that was the dilemma Crowley found himself in his entire life, plus the fact that he had such a twisted sense of humor that he enjoyed garnering a terribly black reputation because he figured that any publicity was good publicity.
In the title of your book, Lon, it is stated that it's a handbook of the rituals of Thelema. What or who is the Thelema referred to in the book title?
That's a good question. Part of Crowley's magic is that for a number of reasons, it became clear to him that human consciousness had reached one of those points in the evolution of human consciousness that we're taking kind of the next step in our development, in our human consciousness, as if there was a new Aeon, a new formula. And it's a very simple thing that has changed worldwide in human consciousness. It is so simple that you don't even think that it could be such a universal step forward in human consciousness, but it is. And because of this step forward in human consciousness, old ways of doing magic, old ways of effectively causing change to occur in conformity to all of our wills has changed just a little bit than it was, say, 1,000 years ago, or 3,000 years ago, or even 300 years ago. That's how recently this change has occurred. And the change is, and we could call this change Thelema, and I'll tell you why in just a minute, for an Aeon in human development. We were not truly conscious of too much besides of the environment around us. We were not too concerned with anything except filling our bellies every day. And along with that, we didn't even have a 9-month attention span to know where babies came from. I'm talking long time ago. And we were concerned with just filling our bellies. We didn't think about night and day and things like that, except that it observes that it's happening. That would be one magical Aeon in human consciousness, where we just thought about taking nourishment directly from the earth. If there was a supernatural goddess or god that was right in front of us that just totally blew our minds of supernatural powers, it was the woman who literally could grow with cycles of the moon, and then she'd pop, and then out comes another person. She replicate, and she's like the earth itself. Plants just come out of her miraculously. So that was a period where our magical formula was wrapped up in the idea of woman, the goddess, and earth. And it's kind of connected with the moon too, because she swells with 9 moons and things like that. Not only that, but after she literally creates a new human being, and remember, we don't have a 9-month attention span yet. We're thinking that, I don't know how it happened, but boy, she just replicates. After the baby's born, she just plugs the baby in, feeds the baby directly, right out of her own body, just like the earth feeds us with the plants and the animals that just comes out of the earth. That's the magical formula of 2 aeons ago. You could call it the pagan formula, where the goddess, the mother stuff. Then we got a little smarter, and then we started to observe a couple things at the same time. We observed that these plants don't grow and the animals don't come in as much abundance when the sun doesn't shine a lot. And then we became conscious of the sun and how important the penetrating rays of the sun are in the ground, penetrating sunlight, penetrating earth to bring forth plants. About the same time, we figured out that those wonderful, ecstatic, wild and crazy encounters that woman has with man, 9 months after that, she has the baby. It's a partnership. We started to realize it's a step forward in consciousness. We realized it was a partnership of the sun and the earth, the man and the woman, the god and the goddess. And that's the next Aeon. And that Aeon was characterized by our consciousness of the sun and the fact that, as we observe, the sun is born every day and dies every night and teeters toward extinction in the winter. We didn't know if it's ever going to come back, and then comes back. So we got all hung up on death, that the sun dies and we have to do something. We have to do something here on our flat earth. We have to do prayers. We have to do what the sun seems to like is this cycle of death and birth. The sun wants us to kill things regularly, wants us to sacrifice. Sun likes sacrifice. And once we start sacrificing to the sun comes up every morning, works every time. And that's exactly the trick of priestcrafts. As long as we keep sacrificing, I guarantee you the sun's going to come up. But that was kind of a step forward in human consciousness from the Aeon before that. Now we know that the sun stays on all the time. the sun doesn't die. And it's taken a good 1,000 years for that fact to seep deep enough into the psyches of the human consciousness as a whole to realize that the sun is on all the time, and we're just spinning around on a little ball, and the night and day and life and death is just moving from shadow to light, from shadow to light. But the light stays on all the time. And that has seeped deep inside to the very core of human consciousness. And deep down inside, we know that we're on all the time, that we've never been off, that we'll never be off. Death itself is as illusionary as night and day. And that solar reality is that one factor in human consciousness that characterizes what Thelema is. Thelema is a Greek word for will, and the consciousness of our own continuity of existence presents to us our duty to the cosmos and to ourselves to recognize the singularity of our consciousness and the eternalness of our consciousness, and the fact that we as individuals are like the sun itself and not like a satellite to the sun. We're like solar beings ourselves. And the sun shines and does its thing as an aspect, as an exercise in its own will to be. And each of us have that duty too. Each of us has our own duty, and that we wouldn't even be conscious as a conscious monad of existence unless there was something that must be done in the cosmos that only we can do. And that is our will. So Thelema means will. So the rituals of Thelema would, in essence, was Crowley taking the quite viable rituals of just the last Aeon that succeeded beautifully in manipulating, playing with the elements and planetary spheres. There's lots of good, solid, enlightened magic that's taken place over the last 300 or 400 years. And Crowley didn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. He didn't want to throw the baby Jesus out with the bathwater. He wanted to show us what the baby Jesus was about. Thelema has its own sort of set of universal principles that it deals with in the same way as the previous Aeon of Osiris had its principles to deal with too. If you sort of, part of my book, and this is the new edition, I just happen to have one here, I sort of give a nice little introduction to what those old rituals were and what they were about, and then how Crowley has tweaked them, and sort of I explain kind of step by step the importance of this new way of looking at things. So that's the short answer to your question.
Should viewers of Paranormal Yacker want to buy the Magick of Aleister Crowley, a handbook of the Rituals of Thelema, or any of your other books, how can they do that?
Oh, just go to Amazon. That's probably the easiest way to find all. Just type my name in Amazon. They're in audiobook, paperback. Some of them are in hardbound. A lot of them are in Kindle too. So they're in every format you want.
Lon Milo DuQuette, I thank you for being my guest on Paranormal Yacker and sharing with my viewers your extensive knowledge of master magician and occultist Aleister Crowley.
Okay, thank you for having me.
Hi, everyone. This is Stan Mallow, the Paranormal Yacker. I hope you enjoyed part one of my interview with Lon Milo DuQuette. In part two, I'll be talking with him about the myths and legends surrounding Aleister Crowley, the reasons he wrote in a cryptic style, and the inner secrets of his Gnostic Mass. So that you don't miss it, have access to past interviews, and be amongst the first to receive new interviews when released, be sure to subscribe to my free YouTube channel. To do that, just press the subscribe button on your screen.